The bells never stopped ringing. They tolled at dawn, at dusk, and through the long, feverish nights, their iron voices seeping into stone walls and human bones alike. Each toll announced another death, another house sealed, another family erased. The city no longer smelled like bread, wine, or damp wool. It reeked of rot, smoke, sewage, and the sweet, unmistakable stench of decay. Even the air felt diseased, thick and heavy, clinging to the throat with every breath. Inside a narrow room above a shuttered butcher's shop, Master Aldrich prepared for another attempt at salvation. He was a physician by training, though these days that word felt like a cruel joke. His hands shook slightly as he washed them in a basin of vinegar, the sharp scent barely masking the smell of death that lived permanently beneath his fingernails. The walls were lined with shelves, and every shelf groaned under the weight of jars, bundles, and sacks, each containing some grotesque hope against the plague. A boy lay on the table before him, no more than 12 years old, his body thin as a starving dog. Dark swellings bulged grotesquely along his neck and beneath his jaw, stretched tight and shiny, veins spidering across the skin. The buboes had ripened quickly, turning from angry red to a bruised purple-black that made Aldrich's stomach knot. The boy's lips were cracked and bleeding, his breath shallow and hot, each exhale rattling like loose stones in a cup. Aldrich's assistant, Tomas, hovered nearby, pale and hollow-eyed. He had not slept properly in weeks. None of them had. He worsened overnight, Tomas said quietly, as if speaking too loudly might hasten the boy's death. His mother begged me to do something. Anything. There is always something, Aldrich replied, though the words tasted bitter. He turned and scanned the shelves, his gaze lingering on the remedies he had once believed in with scholarly confidence. Dried herbs from distant lands. Powders made from crushed pearls and gemstones. Animal parts preserved in oil. And worse, far worse, substances no university had ever taught him to use. He selected a ceramic bowl already prepared and set it on the table. Tomas recoiled instinctively as the stench hit him. The mixture was thick and brown, lumpy and wet, alive with a smell so foul it seemed to crawl into the nose and refuse to leave. "Is that?" Tomas began, then stopped. "Yes," Aldrich said flatly. "Human waste, aged and mixed with vinegar and rosemary." Galen himself wrote that corruption may be drawn out by corruption. He did not mention that Galen had never faced a plague like this. The boy stirred weakly as Aldrich smeared the paste onto the swollen flesh of his neck. His eyes fluttered open, cloudy with fever, and a hoarse cry escaped his throat. The cold, sticky substance made him flinch. "Hold him," Aldrich ordered. Tomas obeyed, gripping the boy's shoulders as gently as he could. The smell filled the room, overpowering even the smoke from the tallow candles. Aldrich worked quickly now, driven by a mixture of urgency and dread. He reached for a knife, its blade nicked and stained from countless uses. Holding it over the flame, he waited until the metal glowed a dull red. "This will hurt," Aldrich murmured, unsure whether the boy could even understand him. "But pain is life." He pressed the blade to the skin beside the bubo. There was a sharp hiss, like meat dropped onto a hot pan, followed by the unmistakable odor of burning flesh. The boy screamed, a thin, piercing sound that cut through the constant ringing of bells outside. His body bucked, and Tomas struggled to keep him still, tears streaming down his own face as he whispered apologies he knew meant nothing. Aldrich's heart pounded in his chest. He told himself this was necessary. Cauterization, bleeding, purging, these were the tools he had been given. The plague was a poison of imbalance, a corruption of humors. If he could only force the body back into harmony, survival might follow. When the blade was withdrawn, the flesh around the wound was blackened and blistered. The boy sobbed weakly, then fell silent, slipping back into unconsciousness. Aldrich wiped his brow and nodded to Tomas, who fetched a small velvet pouch. Inside were substances worth more than most men earned in a lifetime: crushed emeralds, powdered snake skin, and ground antler horn. Aldrich sprinkled the glittering dust onto the wound, pressing it in with his fingers. "The wealthy swear by this," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "They believe precious things repel death." "And do they survive?" Tomas asked quietly. "Sometimes," Aldrich replied. He did not say that the poor died just as often, whether treated or not. Hours dragged by. The candle burned low. The boy's breathing grew slower, more uneven. Aldrich sat beside him, counting each breath, listening for signs of strength. Instead, He heard the wet rattle deepen, the chest struggling against lungs that no longer wished to work. When the final breath came, it was so soft Aldrich almost missed it. He pressed his fingers to the boy's neck, waiting, hoping. There was nothing. For a long moment, neither man moved. The bells rang again outside, closer now, as if mocking them. Aldrich closed the boy's eyes and covered his face with a cloth. Another for the cart, he said softly. Tomas turned away, vomiting into the corner. Aldrich remained where he was, staring at his hands that had burned, cut, smeared filth, and pressed false hope into dying flesh. He had once believed knowledge would protect him, that learning separated him from superstition. Now, surrounded by jars of leeches and feces, he could no longer tell the difference. Outside, a cart creaked past, its wheels heavy with the weight of the dead. The bells continued their endless song, and Aldrich prepared himself for the next knock on the door, knowing he would do it all again. Night clung to the city like a damp shroud, and the courtyard behind the monastery glimmered faintly under a pale, sickle-shaped moon. The stone walls, once meant to shelter prayer and reflection, now enclosed suffering in all its raw and unfiltered forms. Groans echoed off the masonry, mixing with whispered prayers, choking coughs, and the frantic flutter of wings. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, blood, fear, and something far worse, the coppery sweetness of sickness that announced death long before it arrived. Sister Marguerite moved through the courtyard with slow, deliberate steps. Her habit was stiff with dried blood and grime, its original color long lost beneath stains that could not be scrubbed away. Her face, gaunt and hollow-eyed, bore the quiet resignation of someone who had watched too many lives flicker out and learned that hope, like the body, could only stretch so far before tearing. She carried no books of medicine, no polished instruments of learning. Instead, she carried faith, rumor, and desperation, tools just as sharp and often just as cruel. A woman knelt before her, shaking violently despite the heavy wool cloak wrapped around her shoulders. Fever glazed her eyes, and dark swellings distorted the skin beneath her arms and along her groin. Every breath she took was shallow and uneven, as though her chest could no longer remember how to rise properly. Around them, others waited their turn in miserable silence, some slumped against the walls, others clutching charms or muttering prayers through cracked lips. "Please," the woman whispered, her voice barely audible. "I have children." Sister Marguerite nodded once, her expression unreadable. She reached down and lifted a wooden cage from the ground. Inside it, a live chicken thrashed wildly, its feathers ruffling as it sensed danger. Its eyes were bright and frantic, its beak opening and closing in panicked gasps. "The sickness seeks life," the sister said softly, more to herself than to the woman. "It clings to Orv. We must give it another place to go." The woman's hands trembled as Sister Marguerite pressed the chicken firmly against the swollen bubo beneath her arm. The bird shrieked and beat its wings, feathers tearing loose as it struggled. Strips of cloth were wound tightly around them, binding animal and human together in a grotesque embrace. The heat of the woman's fever met the frantic warmth of the bird, and both trembled. "You must hold it there," the sister instructed. "Until the chicken dies." Tears streamed down the woman's face as minutes crawled past. The bird's movements grew weaker, its cries fading into pitiful chirrs before stopping altogether. When the body finally went limp, an awful stillness settled over them. Sister Marguerite unwound the cloth and removed the dead chicken, its feathers matted darkly against the woman's skin. "The poison has passed," she said, though even she could not fully convince herself. Nearby, another treatment was underway. A cauldron bubbled over a low fire, its contents writhing unnaturally. Live snakes had been dropped into boiling oil, their bodies coiling and uncoiling in frantic spasms as heat overtook them. The stench was overwhelming, greasy, burnt, and animal, making several onlookers gag. Once reduced to a thick, foul-smelling liquid, the oil would be ladled into bowls and rubbed into patients' skin, believed to slither into the body and drive the plague away as a snake might chase prey from a burrow. Further along the courtyard, men sat on low stools with their sleeves rolled up. Leeches clung to their arms, fattening rapidly as they drank. Some men watched in grim fascination as the creatures swelled, their translucent bodies filling with dark blood. Others turned away, retching or praying. Buckets filled steadily with blood were carried off and dumped into the gutters, where they mingled with rainwater and filth. The more blood removed, the healers claimed, the less poison remained inside. A young monk moved through the crowd, offering small bundles of dried flowers and herbs. "Wear these around your neck," he urged. "The scent will protect you." The herbs did little to mask the pervasive odor of death, but people clutched them desperately, as though belief itself might serve as armor. Sister Marguerite paused beside a man who had collapsed against the wall, his breathing shallow, his eyes glassy. She knelt and pressed her fingers to his wrist. The pulse fluttered weakly, then stilled. She closed his eyes, murmuring a prayer, and signaled for the body to be removed. No ceremony followed. There was no time. As the hours passed, the courtyard grew quieter. Some patients staggered away, convinced they had been saved. Others lay motionless, covered hastily with cloaks or rags. Chickens lay piled in a corner, their bodies stiff and lifeless. Used leeches were scraped from flesh and tossed aside, their engorged forms wriggling briefly before dying. Just before dawn, a light rain began to fall. It washed blood from the stones, thinned the oily residue from the cauldron, and carried the filth toward the drains. Sister Marguerite stood alone in the center of the courtyard, her hands clasped tightly together, her lips moving in silent prayer. She had done all she could, or all she believed she could. When the sun finally rose, it revealed a courtyard littered with the remnants of desperate hope: dead animals, stained cloth, empty buckets. Some of those treated would live, not because of the cures, but because fate had spared them. Many more would not. The plague did not care about faith or fear, chickens or snakes, blood or oil. It moved unseen and unstoppable, indifferent to the most disgusting remedies humanity could devise. And as the bells began to ring once more, Sister Marguerite turned to face another day, knowing the courtyard would soon be full again.